The Trudeau cabinet has been taking part in a retreat over the past few days, planning out the new throne speech slated for September 23rd. Now, one of the things we've not heard is that the government has not consulted with opposition parties, despite promising massive change. To talk more about it is one of our regular contributors, journalist Brian Lilley, joining me once again from Toronto. Brian, is this part of the new normal?
Well, is it part of the new normal, part of the old normal? Is it Justin Trudeau being what he said he wouldn't be? I mean, we have to remember this is a prime minister who did not win the popular vote in the last election. He got more than 250,000 votes fewer than the Conservatives, but he did win more seats, but not a majority. This is a government that, was elected the first time talking about being respectful of Parliament and consulting other parties and not just ramming things through. And here we are in the middle of a pandemic with the government that won 33% of the popular vote last time at a time when most, voter turnout was not 100%. I believe I've seen it estimated at about 22% of Canadians voted for the Liberals to be in power. Out of all eligible voters, 22% voted for them to be in power. So maybe you'd think that they would reach out to the Conservatives, to the New Democrats, to the Bloc Québécois and say, look, we're looking at doing some massive changes. We think that there are ways to, come back from this pandemic and this recession that will make Canada better. We'd like you on side. They haven't consulted a single opposition leader. And when asked about it, the prime minister just said, oh, we've been consulting all the time, just not on, well, the throne speech or the budget or any of the big changes that we're going to be bringing in.
Now, some of the massive changes usually means a massive price tag, which means a little more spending of our taxpayers' dollars here. Brian, we already have a debt of over $1 trillion, our deficit $343 billion. The Parliamentary Budget Office and the big banks said this cannot continue.
But Justin Trudeau thinks that it can, and he wants to. And it would be difficult for Aaron O'Toole and the Conservatives, who are the main opposition party. I've been looking at some recent polling that shows the NDP still not doing well, so they're not going to be a threat to the Liberals. But it would be very difficult for Aaron O'Toole and the Conservatives to come out and start talking about cutting at this point or saying we need to return to a balanced budget. Even voters who are conservative minded aren't ready to start saying we need to get back to balance yet. So Justin Trudeau is finding that sweet spot with the voters and saying, I'm going to give you a lot more money. When he says massive change, he's really talking about massive social program spending, national pharmacare, national child care, a universal basic income, issues that are actually all fundamentally provincial jurisdiction. But he's going to show up with a pot of money and dare the opposition parties to vote him down and call an election. And if they do, then he's going to turn around and say, okay, well, I'm ready to give you all this money. And they're not. So that's kind of the setup that we're looking at as we head towards the throne speech and the budget next week. It really does put Aaron O'Toole in a tough spot.
Now, all of this theater with the throne speech, with promises of more spending, is being seen as a bit of a backdrop for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to set up an election and possibly get a majority. But Brian, some say the threat of a fall election is fading now. Do you buy that?
Not really. I get where some of the analysts that are coming from, why they're saying that. They're saying, look, numbers of COVID-19 are up in various parts of the country. We've seen them rise in Ontario. We've seen some rise in Quebec, Alberta, British Columbia. It's not a spike, but it's a trickle, and it's not a good trend. Let's put it that way. But Blaine Higgs, the Premier of New Brunswick, just won more seats. He's got a stronger majority now than he did before. So if you're Justin Trudeau, you're looking at that and saying, okay, am I able to parlay what we've got in terms of a weak minority into a strong majority? I mean, he's been governing as if he has the strongest majority ever. He's consulting less than a majority government of any stripe would in the past. It is at times he is announcing massive spending programs from the podium. Parliamentarians don't hear about them. Premiers that have to end up dealing with them don't hear about them until he utters the words from the podium. So he could look at this and say, you know what? We've got a really good window here. Let's go. Middle of August, I was reporting on a campaign research poll that I had that showed that the Liberals were down at 30% in the polls. The We scandal had driven people into the undecided columns. They weren't voting Conservative, they weren't voting NDP, but if an election had been had, back in the middle of August when the We scandal was going on, the Liberals would have been in trouble. They very well could have lost the election. Well, what did they do a few days after that first of many polls showing them losing support came out? They prorogued Parliament. They shut down the We committees. They took it off the front pages. They stopped making it the biggest story on television and radio newscasts. And guess what? Now we've got polls showing, the first one, again, campaign research provided to me showing the Liberals at 40%. Stellar support in Atlantic Canada, stronger support in Ontario and Manitoba, stronger support in Alberta than in Saskatchewan, where they're in single digits. But they could end up winning a bunch more seats and a stronger majority than they had in 2015 if they are, able to keep this type of support and head to the polls.
Is it thanks to a lot of the spending that the Trudeau Liberals have done during the pandemic?
Speaking with pollster Nick Cavalis, I put that question to him and just said, okay, are Canadians really behind all this? And his answer was enough Canadians are behind it, that it would lead to a Trudeau majority. That and the NDP is not doing well. The NDP is down at around 15% support. So to give you the top line numbers, Hal, 40% for the Liberals, 30% for the Conservatives, 15% for the NDP, and then the Greens are at 7 and the Bloc is at 6. Those are numbers that spell strong majority for the Liberals. Again, mostly frozen out across the prairies, well, except for Manitoba, where I think they would win back a lot of the seats they lost last time.
Brian, Leslyn Lewis impressed many people with her run during the Tory leadership race. Now Lewis announced that she's seeking a seat. Where will she run?
She's going to run in Haldimand, Norfolk, which is quite a ways from Toronto. If, for people that know the area, well, probably not a whole lot of people know the area. It's a rural township. It's two rural counties on the shores of Lake Erie. Probably the most famous place there is Port Dover. I grew up going to the beach at Port Dover on the weekends when I was a kid. If you ever see the, on TV news, you see the Friday the 13th biker rally that happens there. It's massive. And that's where she's going to run. Port Dover is one of the big towns in Haldimand, Norfolk. It's a safe Conservative seat. It's been held since, I think, 2004. Maybe a little bit earlier, but I think at least since 2004 by Dianne Findlay. She was Minister of Immigration, Minister of Employment Services under Stephen Harper. Her late husband was Senator Doug Findlay, who was a political operative that helped the Harper Conservatives win in multiple elections. She has announced that she is no longer running. It's a real loss for the Conservatives to lose Dianne Findlay. She's a smart woman. You might recognize her from her glasses. She wears sunglasses all the time, dealing with Graves' disease. But Leslyn Lewis, an up-and-comer in the party, someone who impressed an awful lot of people and who will fit right in with the people of Haldimand, Norfolk.
It's interesting. You're right. I've been there many times with my family in Port Dover and all the motorcyclists, not even Friday the 13th. And so Leslyn Lewis knows how to run, but does she know how to ride? That's probably the more important question, right?
And does she like perch with her fish and chips? Because that's
right. Now, Brian, the Trump administration
there.
withdrew the imposed tariffs on Canadian aluminum. Did it have something to do with Canada's $3.6 billion in countermeasures?
I would like to think it might. And the fact that those countermeasures might come in, and I'd like to think some strong diplomacy from our ambassador in the United States, from others in the Liberal government. I'm going to give them high marks on this. We were all surprised when the tariffs came in. Previously, when Donald Trump put in tariffs on aluminum and steel, there was a lot of, telegraphing that this was coming. This most recent go round with the aluminum tariffs, it kind of caught a lot of people off guard. And then the withdrawal kind of caught a lot of people off guard. They were supposed to, the Trudeau government, Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland was supposed to announce a number of countermeasures on Tuesday afternoon. Her press conference delayed a bit because, let's adjust and announce that, those tariffs aren't happening. So high marks for the Trudeau government on this file, absolutely.
Brian, despite the border being closed to non-essential travel, we continually see the Pearson International Airport in Mississauga, just outside of Toronto, receive the most COVID-19 infected international flights. How is this possible during a pandemic?
Because we're still taking back Canadians, and I don't think that they're fully enforcing border measures when it comes to international flights. They restricted flights internationally to 4 airports: Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, and Calgary. Um, since August 31st, Pearson has received 21 different flights. Pearson Airport in Toronto, 21 different flights uh, with people infected from COVID-19. They come from places like India, Chicago, Istanbul, a variety of countries. Zurich, Switzerland, I believe there was a flight from. They can't all be Canadians coming back. In some cases, in a couple of the flights from India, that was the case because they were charters bringing back Canadians who had been stranded in India during the pandemic. But in all these cases, they can't just be Canadians coming back. I fail to believe that that's the case. By the way, after that, I believe the order goes in. I don't have all the numbers in front of me on my screen, but I believe it goes Vancouver, then Calgary, then Montreal. Uh, and there's also flights going back and forth across the country of Canadians flying between destinations within this country who are arriving, and then they get scanned, they get tested, and oops, you've got COVID-19. So we're still spreading it around. I can tell you that we've seen an uptick. Monday, there were 313 new cases in Ontario, 251 on Tuesday. They were saying, oh, well, we've got to close restaurants, we've got to close bars. And the public health officials said, no, it's mostly coming from parties. And by the way, there's a good chunk of it. It's people traveling within Canada, going back and forth. Maybe they're doing a road trip for the weekend to Montreal, or they're, I don't know, driving to Winnipeg. I don't know where they're going, but they're traveling within the country and coming back with COVID-19.
Brian, during a recent meeting with Quebec Premier François Legault, new Conservative leader Erin O'Toole said the Energy East pipeline is off the table. And Alberta Premier Jason Kenney is understandably upset upon hearing the news.
Yeah, this is a bit of an odd one because I get where Erin O'Toole's coming from in saying that Energy East is off the table. The proponent of that pipeline was TransCanada, now TC Energy. They're not interested in building it anymore. And guess what? Nobody else is interested in building a west to east pipeline at this point. We had Line 9, which was reversed and brought Alberta oil down to southern Ontario at the least. And then some of it moved on towards Quebec. But the idea of an Energy East pipeline going from Fort McMurray all the way to the refineries in New Brunswick was opposed by Quebec. The Trudeau government in 2016-17 put on a bunch of new conditions that effectively saw TransCanada walk away and say, we're not dealing with this. I mean, they put conditions on this pipeline that other pipelines, like the natural gas Energy Saguenay pipeline, which takes Western Canadian natural gas to the Saguenay for export, they never had to deal with the same stringent rules as Energy East. So it was the Trudeau government that shot it down. I think it's unfair to criticize O'Toole at this point in saying that he's abandoning Western Canada. If there was somebody proposing a west to east pipeline and he was saying that, I would understand. But at this point, when nobody wants to do this, I think it's a bit of an unfair shot. Hopefully somebody comes up with this idea once Erin O'Toole is in power, and then it can actually happen.
Instead we'll take our oil and we'll take just over a month, go through the Panama Canal to make our way to the East Coast. I guess
well, he did say he'd like to bring back Northern Gateway, which was shut down despite a lack of opposition. So it was just opposed in the Liberal caucus.
Yeah. Last weekend, close to 5,000 people marched in the streets of Ottawa and rallied on Parliament Hill against the Trudeau Liberal gun ban. What was their message? And Brian, will it be heard by those in power?
Their main message was that the Trudeau Liberals are off target with this gun ban, that it won't reduce gun crime. Look, gun crime is something that we should all be concerned about. But unfortunately, the current government at the federal level looks at trying to solve the issue by going after guns and not by going after crime. Their entire gun ban is to ban rifles, many of which are hunting rifles. Yes, there's the AR-15 and there's other black plastic scary looking rifles. There's also an awful lot of shotguns and bolt action rifles being added to this list that are used for hunting elk across the prairies, let's say. Those are being banned, and it makes zero sense. Last week I talked to a guy named Marcel Wilson who has, in the past, he's been out of the gang life for about 16 years now, but he was a user of these guns, a seller of these guns, and a smuggler of these guns. The guns used in the actual gun crime. Guess what? They're handguns. He tells me that they will have zero impact, this ban. Zero impact. It's not going to stop the gangsters shooting up the streets in Toronto or Vancouver or Calgary or Lethbridge. And they tend to use handguns. And this gun ban doesn't deal with that at all. By the way, Toronto Police Service is the only one in the country that provides up-to-date, real-time stats on a weekly basis for shootings. Between May 1st, when Justin Trudeau introduced his gun ban, and the Labor Day weekend, shootings were up 12.5%. Compared to the same time period in 2018, they were up 24%. And compared to 2015, the summer he got or the year he got elected, they're up 83%. So this gun ban's not going to work. It's not going to accomplish what they want. So a good, strong message from the folks marching in Ottawa, but I'm not sure it's going to be heard.
Brian, we have about 10 seconds left here. Quickly, did Calgary Tory MP Michelle Rempel present her anti-gun ban online petition, the largest in Canadian history, in Parliament yet?
It has not been presented in Parliament yet because Parliament has not been sitting, but it did finish off its, I believe it's a 6-month term, and she will be able to present that once the House comes back. Largest petition, e-petition in Canadian history.
One of our regular contributors, Brian Lilley from Sun Media, joining me once again from Toronto. Thanks so much, Brian.
Thank you.